in January of 1993. I was working in the federal government in Washington, D.C. I was behind my desk, feverishly working on a report that was due that evening. And the next thing I knew, I found myself on my back, on the floor, with excruciating chest pain. I had a cardiologist tell me that at the age of 42, I'd had a heart attack. A couple days into the recovery, I had a friend of my wife's visit me, and he brought me a book written by Dr. Dean Ornish, and the book was entitled Reversing Heart Disease. Dr. Ornish began the discussions of his interventions, his solutions to that disease, and the first one involved diet. And it was a fairly radical diet. It was entirely vegetarian, and it not just wasn't vegetarian, it was extremely low fat. Well, then I went on to the next chapter, and that chapter was a little bit strange, to tell you the truth, because it had a bunch of stick figures in it doing these pretzel poses. I was out of the hospital, and 2 weeks later, I visited with my cardiologist, and I asked him if he'd ever heard about this Dr. Dean Ornish and this book about reversing heart disease. And my cardiologist said, well, Dr. Ornish is kind of out there on his own. So instead, I embraced my cardiologist's recommendations. I was supposed to moderate my diet, not eat so much red meat, substitute chicken, substitute fish, rest for 6 weeks, and then go back to my normal life activities, which included working 60 or 70 hours a week in the federal government, looking at every opportunity to go up that next rung on the ladder, and I spent the next several years doing that to some relative success. I had my second heart attack 3 days before my 50th birthday. I'd come home frustrated, angry. I began to self-medicate with alcohol. I had my third heart attack in June of 2002. And then finally in November of 2003, I had my fourth heart attack. In February of 2005, I was diagnosed with my fifth heart attack. By that time, my cardiologist stopped offering suggestions. It was pretty clear where my disease was heading. I left that day and I told myself that there had to be something else that I could do to save my life. I got home later that day, and that evening as I was sitting in a fair amount of despair, I remembered that book from Dean Ornish. And I went through the library and dug it out and dusted it off and started reading it once again. And then read about the stick figures, which I now knew to be yoga. And then read about the concept of opening your heart to love, which I know also now to be yoga. And suddenly, instead of that book being so strange, it made more sense to me than anything that I'd read in my life. So from that day forward, I lived that book. I practiced a complete vegetarian diet. I exercised every day by prescription of Dr. Ornish. I practiced yoga twice a day. And slowly, week after week, month after month, I began to feel better. My energy increased. My outlook on life continued to improve. I was able to increase my time at working out. I was able to increase my asanas. I was able to go back to doing the things that I was doing before in my life. A year prior, when I was going to have that implant in my chest, my ejection fraction, which is the primary test of heart efficiency, was 29. That's about half that of a normal beating heart. The ejection fraction had arisen to almost 50, which is essentially normal for a person of my age. In addition to that, the METS level, which is essentially a test of aerobic capacity, heart capacity. For a normal person with no previous heart disease, a METS of 10 is considered excellent. Mine was 13. And after the shock of that wore off, another emotion came in, and the emotion was, this this really is a miracle. What am I supposed to do with the rest of my life? And it was at that point that it became crystal clear to me what I needed to do with the rest of my life. And I'm now working at Augusta Medical Center teaching yoga to not only regular yoga students, we're also putting together programs for yoga for cancer patients. It's just another example of Gurudev's love and his hand on my shoulder, directing me in every aspect of my recovery and now my new life.
I don't think that you can truly achieve health, certainly the health that will make you happy and glow in life, without dealing with the spiritual issues. Because you have to have an insight into what it's all about. And we frequently look upon organized religion, and by the way, sometimes organized religion comes in the form of science, to deal with these issues for us. But at the end of every experience of that nature, there's always the why. Why is this happening? Why is this worth it? And what's going to become of me? And we have to have some type of a congruent system for ourselves to cope with that question. And for that reason, I would never try to advise someone to take care of their body without dealing at the same time with the spiritual issues that I know they're facing, because they're human, and all humans face that issue.